At number 15, I'm putting The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut. Labatut's really impressed me the last couple of years, reading The Maniac this year, and last year I read When We Cease to Understand the World. These books definitely share a lot of qualities in that they're about historical figures, and the voice is very similar between them as well. There's a kind of propulsive energy to them. The way that the dialogue or the prose is sort of flat, almost like it's relaying facts and information rather than attempting to create any sort of artistic style. I think The Maniac succeeds even more than When We Cease to Understand the World, in my opinion at least, in how it's so unsettling, especially the main story about John von Neumann and the sort of apocalyptic implications of the final section regarding AlphaGo. I can't wait to read more of what Labatut has to offer. He's sort of maybe the author to look out for me, going forward. 14th, I have The Overstory by Richard Powers. I was particularly moved by the framing device of this book, how the characters come together and then drift apart. I think that structure shows a lot of care on Powers' part, his desire to create something in this book that goes beyond the page. I'm really curious to read Bewilderment and his newest novel, Playground. It seems like they make sort of a thematic trilogy regarding humans and their place in the world. As always, Powers has a really elegant prose style, but it seems like compared to his earlier works, this book is a little bit more refined, or at least he isn't doing as many verbal gymnastics. He's not looking to put on a show in the same way as he was in, for example, the Goldberg Variations. I really love this book. I was really happy to get to it this year. At 13, I have They Came Like Swallows by William Maxwell, and I really love this cover from Nonpareil Books, Godine imprint. This cover might be my favorite of the year. This image is really striking. Maxwell, to me, seems like a real writer's writer, knowing how many people he's worked with and edited. And in both of the novels of his that I've read, his style is really economical. There's no fluff to it. Everything is sort of delivered, as is. You can sort of take this 100% face value. He's not asking you to do any serious heavy lifting. He's sort of laying everything out directly for you. That said, he does a really good job of changing perspectives, and as the characters are of different ages and different temperaments, his prose changes in a really remarkable way that is both obvious and also entertaining. I really loved this book. It was quite moving. I'd like to read more William Maxwell soon. At number 12, I put Walter Benjamin's Illuminations. Benjamin has become one of my favorite thinkers, and I think this collection is a really, really great way to introduce yourself to Benjamin. You can see a lot of his influences and a lot of the things he's concerned with, his literary influences, his thoughts on history, and his thoughts on criticism. I also think the introduction in here by Hannah Arendt is one of the best sort of critical essays and literary biography pieces I've ever read. This year was a great chance for me to revisit Kafka as well, and so Benjamin's writings about Kafka are, for my money, the best that, at least that I've read. He writes Kafka maybe better than anybody, and I'm continuing to read his stuff. I'm going to look forward to reading more of his works in the future. I'd like to revisit this one, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. The importance of this essay is profound, and it's the kind of thing I don't think I understood reading it just once. I'd like to visit it again and again, but that's Illuminations. At number 11, Augustus by John Williams, the greatest historical novel I've ever read, and another one that shows really mastery of prose styling, the way the tension and drama is constantly underlying all of these missives and letters between people. The form of the letter and the style of the writing, it seems to reflect something of a traditional understanding of Roman society. as we see it today. And so Williams does a really good job of keeping that voice steady throughout the novel and the different characters writing, and underneath creating so much rich character work and drama, even knowing that this is largely historical record and things we can research and predict the outcomes in advance, but there's still so much drama and depth in how Williams depicts this story. Rounding out the top 10 is The Metaphysical Club, A Story of Ideas in America by Louis Menand. I find myself really drawn to this period of history, this sort of late 19th century, where all of the ideas that sort of started in the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, they're all sort of reaching, they're all building up to the climax that sort of bursts open in the First World War and in the 20th century. So this last burst of ideas and energy that comes in the 1870s, 80s, 90s from thinkers like William James and Oliver Wendell Holmes. Something about it's really interesting to me. All those old guys with beards, I don't know, something about it really gets to me. And Menand does such a good job of putting these things narratively to be satisfying, but it's also a really rich intellectual history. The literary references and allusions, the notes, and this book in itself will lead me to so many other books that will be hopefully equally rewarding, if not as riveting. And as I mentioned in my last video, I can't wait to read his follow-up, The Free World. Number 9 for me is The Years by Annie Ernaux. I think it's pretty lucky that Ernaux won the Nobel Prize. I think her style, the way she writes and the things she writes about, would otherwise and by and large seem to have been overlooked, or would be overlooked without the award. And the publication of all of these books and the widespread, her books are so widespread, especially out here in Japan. Any book that gets this kind of award, you can buy them at any of the bookstores. I personally consider myself lucky. I feel enriched, my life to be enriched from having read this book. Ernaux's France, her story of France, told in this plural, first-person plural we. She fills it with all of the bric-a-brac and disposable culture that fills in the gaps in between the larger parts of history, the larger story. And the fact that she's able to make that so compelling, and the feeling of retrieving and building a collective memory is captivating. And I'd like to read more of her writings. I have 2 of her books on my shelf, and her memoirs are supposed to be so excellent. I don't know if they're as structurally creative as this one, if they're a little bit more traditionally formatted or not. I'm not sure, but this one was a wonderful discovery for me this year, and I'm looking forward to reading more in the years to come. Number 8, I have The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño. This book will exist to me as a testament to trying books that you've failed. If you've tried to read a book and you couldn't finish it all the way, you've always got to try it again. I must have read the first 200 or 300 pages of this book maybe 3 years ago, and I just petered out. I just ran out of steam and I couldn't keep going, and I thought that was going to be it, and that for me, Bolaño would be outside of 2666, kind of, not quite as esteemed in my personal canon, but I was lucky to find a used copy of The Savage Detectives out here, and boy, he delivers so much. Getting to the end of the book is, it seems obvious, right? It's kind of every book you're supposed to get to the end, but knowing that I gave up halfway through, I can't believe that I did that to myself. I feel like I was robbed of a wonderful reading experience. And the fact that I was able to revisit it and get the whole thing under my belt, just, it's fortunate. And so every time in the future I want to give up on a book, I'll let myself know that it's okay, and for all I know, it'll be another Savage Detectives. Bolaño cares so much about poetry and art, and he is exploring the true artist's life to the ultimate end. This absolute disregard for any sort of legacy, any sort of physical memento, physical trace of your work in the world. He really wants to get past all of that and show the life of the artist living the art themselves. And the voices in this book are so compelling. The framing device at the beginning and the end, I find the ending to be satisfying, and some of the episodes in here are still super fresh in my memory. I love Bolaño so much, and this was a wonderful, wonderful book to have finally finished. Number 7, I have The Sound of the Mountain by Yasunari Kawabata. Kawabata, to me, is the pinnacle of modern Japanese literature. I don't think anyone's gotten it quite better than him. The other person here would be maybe Kenzaburo Oe, but so much of his writing is about subverting Japanese culture, and Kawabata's is about exploring it more as it exists traditionally. The Sound of the Mountain is simultaneously beautiful and moving, and it gave me a sense of inner peace that I want to find in every book I read. I'd like every book I read to make me feel the way The Sound of the Mountain did. And that's not to say that Kawabata is particularly sentimental or gushy. He's not. There's some really stark images in here. I remember I had highlighted one looking at sunflowers. They're fine specimens, like heads of famous people. Stuff like that is far out. He does explore a lot of traditional Japanese imagery and flowers and the changing of the seasons, stuff like that. I think Kawabata is excellent, and I think this might be him at his best. If it's not this one, it's the Palm of the Hand stories, but by nature those are so brief that you're sort of left really wanting something else to hang on to, and you can find it in The Sound of the Mountain. I'm planning to do a reread of this book sooner rather than later. I want to reread Snow Country and Palm of the Hand stories as well. At number 6, I have The Royal Family by William T. Vollmann. It's been interesting to me as I've been reading more William T. Vollmann and sort of getting more of like a context for him, his reputation online. A lot of people have this feeling that Vollmann is a more interesting person than he is a writer. This is sort of the line that you see repeated a lot online. He's had this really interesting life and he's done all these interesting things, but his writing isn't that good. I can't say I agree with that. I think certainly his writing and his output reflects sort of a compulsion to put thoughts onto the page in a way that would not necessarily lend itself towards a heightened level of quality throughout. That said, this book and others would go to show that he does have a really good eye or ear or whatever you want to say. The way he crafts the story and his writing is, I think, incredibly beautiful. And I think that's hard. I think the stuff that Vollmann writes about is so dark and so degraded. It's really hard to sort of let the art be what it is, instead of just looking at this book kind of as like a filthy thing. There's so much that Vollmann wants to say in here, And, this book is so long and the text is so small that, it's 700 and something pages, but it really feels like, formatting wise, it could be 800 or 900 pages. And living in a book for that long, if it's going to be filled with such dark themes and dim subject matter, you really have to be a hell of a writer to pull it off and not make it sort of an act of self wounding, of sort of inflicting this trauma upon yourself. It's not like that at all. Living in this world, as I was in it, I was affected. I was affected by the world that Wollman depicts here. I felt mentally shifted by the story. But getting onto the other side of it, getting through it when it's all over, and that there's this crash of tension and release, and you're sort of wondering, this resolution, is it really resolved at all? And the answer is, of course not. It can't be. It can never be. That's part of the deal. That's part of the game. All of this strife, all of this blood is, how much does it mean? I don't know. I think I'm rambling, but I love Wollman. I love this book. At number 5, I have Death in Equality by Lucinda Ebersole. This book was another huge discovery for me. I heard about this book from another YouTuber a few years ago, and I was lucky to find a copy being sold online. The fact that it's got this letter from Lucinda herself to Steve Moore gives this book as a physical object, like, real aura. I mean, talking about Walter Benjamin, like, there's an aura in this book and in this physical copy itself. Ebersole's determination to depict the declining mental faculties of someone experiencing cancer and death, having that put out in prose, her commitment to that is really praiseworthy. The stories she intersperses, these sort of tales, almost legends of a small town in the American South, they're almost part of this American mythology that you see in other short story writers. The fact that she's able to have them all come together and build up this larger piece is really commendable. And it's a shame that there aren't more Lucinda Ebersole novels. There might be one that was published posthumously or near her passing, but if this is meant to be a thesis statement and a final artistic representation of her life and her thoughts, then it's quite a moving one and quite beautiful. At number 4, Autumn Rounds by Jacques Poulan. Poulan has become one of my favorite writers. I've read 3 of his books from Archipelago, and I have the last one, Spring Tides, ready to be read next year. I think Poulan is a writer whose comfort zone and whose interests and influences just overlaps with mine really comfortably. Like, the sort of the shape of the house is the same shape that I want, but the decorations are just like different enough that I'm interested in what he's talking about. All of his books seem to be about literary men who are older and somewhat isolated from their communities. And this one in particular, this man driving around Quebec in a bookmobile, the reading experience as an act of community building and bridging was something I found really sweet. I also think Poulan is able to walk a tightrope with these characters he writes about, where they're not so obviously wish fulfillment self-inserts, although clearly his life as a literary man gets into the characters he writes about. I think what I loved most about this book, and why it's my favorite of Poulan's books that I've read, is that it's the least directly about creating literature. It's not about translation or writing directly. The main character is not a writer, so he's able to explore reading more in itself, which, you know, I don't write as much as we all aspire to be writers in one way or another. It's way easier for me to connect to the reader, and his character is a wonderful reader and sharer of books, and I just loved this one. I loved it to bits. Number 3, An Ermine in Chernopol by Gregor von Rizori. As I said when I first mentioned An Ermine in Chernopol, Rizori's Chernopol is just as compelling, just as filled with wonder, just as populated by wonderful characters as Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Macondo and Proust's Combray, etc. All of these famous literary towns. The town is the big drawing point for me in this book. It's a world unlike any other I've read about, but at the same time, the points of reference are so familiar. It's the combination that's so unique. Of course, the whole book is sort of building up to this outburst of anti-Semitism in this town, but there is a wonderful depiction. There's a sort of stereotypically Jewish character in the book. It's this character, Saul Brill, or Solly Brill, and he goes on this sort of play where he's sort of acting out the members of his family in this sort of dramatic scene. He's sort of replicating it for laughs. Rizori captures something in the voice of this character and in this scene that I swear I grew up with like 50 dudes like that. It was remarkable and one of the funniest things I've ever read. The fact that he's able to do this and create other memorable characters and have all of these things happening that are not in themselves dramatic, but they're depicting the situation of this time and place, this post-World War I, pre-World War II country that is gone. It doesn't really exist anymore. The city exists, but it's changed hands, and the population has changed so much that, you know, similar to Annie Ernaux, he's sort of trying to create a collective memory, but in this case, the memory is more about the memory of being a child in this place, and what did that feel like, and who existed at the time for these children. And Rizori does a really good job of keeping the book, the tone of the book is pretty consistent all throughout until this explosion, this event of anti-Semitism, and then the end of the book, the tone shifts and it becomes a little bit more bitter. The people talking, they have a little bit harder of a time communicating with each other. It's really wonderful, and Rizori is someone I'm so interested in reading more of. I'm very, very fortunate to have his books on my shelf, and I will read them happily next year if everything goes according to my plan. Number 2 is Solenoid by Mircea Cărtărescu. This book imprinted on me so hard that it's difficult to remember a time in which I hadn't read this book. And the fact that I read it this year is kind of mind-blowing. You know, I keep track of all the books that I read, and every year, sort of the new year, I have like an internal reset, and it feels like all the books from the year before are finished, and the books from the year to come are, you know, waiting for me fresh, right? There's a clear divide. But I read this book in January, I think, and it feels like I must have read it at least 2 years ago. That's how deeply it was it affected my mind and memory as a reader. I'm gonna get some more light. I think Cărtărescu is really bold. The way that the structure of this book is really, really bold. The images are so surreal and so strange that as you're reading it, the writing is so beautiful that it's easy to be entranced, but the physical descriptions of location are so bizarre that it's not until the end of the book, where you can see the larger purpose of everything that he's been describing, that it all sort of clicks into place. I couldn't believe this book. I can't believe that this book exists and has been translated into English. This this time as readers, we're very, very fortunate. I think this is a book that could be revisited almost endlessly. And I intend to do so. I would like to do so very much. When books start to get this big and it feels like they're taking up a huge part of my time and my life, sometimes I start to get antsy. I start to think about the books I could be reading, or I start to fantasize about finally turning that last page. And, 630 pages went by in a flash. I'd like to have that feeling always. As a reader, that's sort of one of the things I'm chasing, right? I want to feel time slip away, and this book did it for me. Some quick honorable mentions: The Library at Night by Alberto Manguel, Oriental Tales by Marguerite Yourcenar, Light in August by William Faulkner, The Anchor Anthology of French Poetry, Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, and Under the Sign of the Labyrinth by Christina Tudor Sideri. And the top spot #1 book of the year 2024, The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt. A lot of times I feel like waiting for a book often doesn't pay off. The longer you wait, the further you grow away from the person who had originally wanted to read that book. A lot of times this doesn't matter because the work is a classic, and the themes will be relevant, the style will never sort of fade. But sometimes I worry that the books I wanted to read when I was 22, or the books I wanted to read when I was 17, or the books I wanted to read when I was 25, as I age and the further I get away from those ages, I really worry that it won't have the impact on me that it could have had if I just read it when I had been interested in it. Never has this rule been so largely and soundly broken than by The Last Samurai. I wanted to read this book when I was 19 years old, working at Barnes & Noble, and I saw this New Directions copy, and I went through. I had like the old Miramax books copy, like the big black one with the sword, and I had that book and I sold it. And I had like the yellow copy. There's a yellow copy. I don't remember who publishes it. I had that one and I sold it. And finally I was able to find this one, but it took me, over 10 years to get to. And intellectually, it was stimulating and thought-provoking. The style was innovative and captivating. The characters were really interesting. The structure was so cool, and the payoff is so rich. It was able to feed a lot of my like bookish nerd qualities. It made me feel like I was reading a book about books. It was also feeding the Japanese culture part of me and the film part of me, the part of me that wishes he could ride around on the train all day. The relationship between mother and son, Sibylla and Ludo, the conversation between Ludo and his prospective father figures, and how each of them has a slightly different parental or manly archetype, and sort of their reasons or their inabilities of becoming a parent, the way that she's able to lay these all out in a way that is compelling, and it doesn't get tiring. It doesn't feel like she's ever repeating herself. Everything is fresh. Every page is fresh and interesting. I wonder if waiting 10 years to read this book heightened that for me. If I had read it when I was too young to even have, parenting consciously in my mind at all, if I had read it before I moved to Japan, if I had read it before I had experienced prolonged periods of unemployment, before I had my big explosion of interest in literature, it wouldn't have been the same. And that's the reason it's my favorite book of the year, because beyond the wonderful story and beyond the innovative structure and beyond the the genius of Helen DeWitt, each book that you read is shaped by the context in which you read it, and it's rare that the book meets the context in such a rewarding way for me. So that's number one, The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, and I'm looking forward to another great year of reading.